we have to contract. Humanity will contract. And it will either be because we recognize the fact and start doing the smart things, or it will just be forced upon us and it'll be chaos and it'll be brutal.
You want to do this the hard way, or do you want to do it the easy way?
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're back today with somebody I am ecstatic to talk with. He's an ecologist, journalist, author, activist, handsome man, Rex Weyler, the one and only co-founder of Greenpeace.
Thanks, Chris. My pleasure to be here.
Yeah. You inspired me a lot because I know that there's a lot of talk about degrowth and everything, and it's such a controversial topic, and we're going to talk about that. But everything that you say as far as philosophy and living with nature, and it just rings true. And I hope that people like us can get through to the others. So as one of your original directors of Greenpeace, so can you tell us about kind of the most challenging times in some of these campaigns that you did, especially, with the whales? I think the thing with the whales blows my mind.
Well, that was really our first big international ecology campaign. We had done a couple of campaigns to stop nuclear testing in Alaska and at Mururoa, where the French were testing in Mururoa and the U.S. was testing nuclear weapons. And we borrowed this tactic of going out in boats, really from the Quakers, who had sailed boats into nuclear test zones. But the whaling campaign was our first big international ecology campaign. We felt, it's hard to imagine now, but in the 1970s, there was really not much of an ecology movement. There were some conservation groups, but there was no real ecology activist group. And we felt there needs to be a global ecology movement. And we want to do an action that could establish that as a phenomenon. And we came up with this idea to blockade the whalers, because the whales and all the marine mammals at that time were down to between 5 and 10% of their peak herds, and some were extinct. The Atlantic gray whale was already extinct. So we were going to save the whales from extinction. That was our first big ecology campaign plan. That was pretty challenging because we just had a little fish boat. We went out from the west coast of Canada in this fish boat, Chris. It was just insane. I mean, we had people, Canadian naval people saying, "You guys are insane. You're not going to, first of all, you won't find the whalers. And second of all, they'll just outrun you. And, you're just being idiots." If we had known how hard it was, we may not have even tried, but we were a little bit naive enough to do it. And not only did we find the Soviet whalers, the Russian whalers, we did confront them. We had these little inflatable Zodiac boats, and we got in front of the whaling ships and we blockaded them, and we had cameras. We took pictures and the whole thing, and it bloody worked. I mean, that was the thing. Yeah, that was phenomenal, and it worked. And so it was technically challenging, but what I kind of discovered over the years is then we did the seal campaign. The harp seals were in the same sort of situation, down to about 5% of their peak herds. We did a campaign in Canada. I got personally involved and got Greenpeace involved in a campaign in Colorado to stop the Rocky Flats nuclear weapons plant in right there near where I was born, near Golden. And what I noticed in all these campaigns is that the biggest challenge was the fact that we're going up against people who this is their job. So, for example, in Colorado at the Rocky Flats plant, these were just simple people working there. We were talking about closing that plant down, and they're going to lose their job. So the thing that seemed most challenging to me early on in all of that was, and it's the same with the sealers in Newfoundland. I mean, here we are, come from Western Canada, we go to Newfoundland. Newfoundlanders don't like the rest of Canada that much anyway, and they don't like people coming in and telling them to do what to do. Nobody likes someone coming in and telling you what to do. And so there was this whole conflict about people making a living doing destructive things. And we don't want to go in and wreck people's jobs and wreck their lives and take away their livelihood. But man, if we don't change direction here, we are screwed. So to me, that was really one of the biggest challenges, biggest obstacles, was how to work with people who were making a living doing destructive stuff. I mean, people working in a nuclear weapons factory, come on. Let's figure out a way to build something more helpful and useful. So, yeah. And I would say, Chris, I'd say the other real obstacle all along was really to get people to even think ecologically. I mean, it's one thing to say, if you're not directly involved, to say, yeah, we want to save cuddly cute seals and we want to save whales and save big trees and all that. But there's a deeper question. Our entire system, our entire economic system, our consumption, our just the human enterprise on the whole is destructive to the wild world. And so we have to change at a much deeper level. It's easier for people to say, yeah, save the whales, save the seals. But the hard part about change is that you have to change, and people don't like to change. They like doing what they're already doing.
Yeah. And so, and that's, I also find that to be true, but, so then you have to get to a policy level, and that's almost locked up to where you can't do much on the policy level because so much lobbying money that goes into there. But this is really the way to really start change, right? I mean, you have these last generation guys sitting in front of cars and stuff, and I don't know, I think they're right, but are they in your opinion, do you think they're doing effective work?
Yeah, sure. Because I don't think you can start with policy changes.
Okay.
Because and Greenpeace early on, we felt the same way. We have to reach people deep. We have to reach people in their hearts and get people to think and connect with people at a much deeper level than just the data and the facts and change policy. We can't just go to the politicians and say, we need a bunch of new rules. Because for one, the political system is so dysfunctional and corrupted that you're not going to get anywhere. And so what you really have to do is you have to change the way people think and feel to the point that the public will put pressure on the politicians. And so when we did those campaigns against, to save the whales and the seals and to stop nuclear weapons, so forth, and to save the forest, we were going to the people. We were going to the public. And we wanted to connect with people at the deeper level. And then let the political chips fall where they will. And if we put enough pressure on the politicians through the people, then sure, we can then go to the politicians and we can say, hey, you guys want to make all these people happy who are pissed off at you? Well, here's what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the younger people right now sitting in front of cars and so forth, like, go for it. Yeah. Because you want to get the public, focused on what the deeper problems are. And then we'll drag the politicians kicking and screaming afterwards.
Right. I agree. Multi-pronged, right? We need every angle that we can possibly get. I tell that to all my vegan comrades too. Whatever the reason is that they say they want to do it, just let them do it. And you famously, you were making a movie at the time of one of the first whaling deals, right? Did your movie ever get shown anywhere, or?
Yeah, we made a film. But we were always shooting film. I mean, a lot of us were journalists. I was a journalist. My friend Bob Hunter, who I worked with, was a journalist. And Ben and Dorothy Metcalf, who were early Greenpeace founders, were journalists. So we understood that we got to tell the story. It's not just about the data. It's not just about going out and doing something dramatic. You got to document it, and you got to be able to show the pictures, show the images, show things that can reach people viscerally. And so when people saw pictures of us out there saving the whales and the whales getting shot and blood all over the water, we didn't have to explain it. And when we were out on the ice, when the Norwegian sealers were out there clubbing little baby seals that were 6 weeks old, and there was blood all over the ice, you don't need the data. You don't need to explain it. That people can see this is not okay, right? So we were always taking film, always taking photographs. And yeah, we made a film of the first film that we actually made as an organization in between 1975 and 1977. We made a film about the whale campaigns. I think it was called Voyage to Save the Whales. And we were shooting on 16 millimeter Bolex. People don't realize, a lot of younger people don't realize, it wasn't a digital world back then. You could actually shoot the film, process the film. It was a lot different. But anyway, we made this really nice film, shot on 16 millimeter film. We shot thousands of hours of film during those projects.
Yeah, and that visceral connection you get when you actually see something going on. There's a ratio of people in when you show it to them, they'll say this is wrong. But there's also some amount of people that won't. It seems like they don't care no matter what that you show them. Is that ring true?
Well, not only that, but the more you do, anytime you take an action, you're going to create reaction. You're going to create opposition. So the more you do, people get even more pissed off and even more strident in opposition. All those crazy environmentalists out there, blockading, honest people making a living. Right. Whatever the position is, there's always going to be opposition. And people called us every kind of nasty thing in the world, and tried to mock us and tarnish our reputation and call us a bunch of crazy hippies, and we did too much drugs, which, by the way, was probably true, but but beside the point, because it had nothing to do with it. I mean.
Well, I mean, you could be said that some certain amount of psychedelics is helpful in understanding truths about the environment, like to go for a walk after a nice couple mushrooms or something. Really changed my life to the degree where I'll never be the same.
No, I felt that way. That we used to say, people would get on us for smoking pot, and we'd say, well, can you explain why smoking pot is any worse than drinking alcohol? You guys are all alcoholics. You guys go home and have your whiskey in the afternoon. What's wrong with us? Smoking some pot. Yeah. But the whole thing with psychedelics is even different, because with mushrooms and other things like that, like for a lot of people, it really, and I would say for me as well, I mean, it really opened up our awareness and consciousness of a deeper connection to the wild world. And the nice thing about those drugs is you don't need to keep doing them.
Right.
I mean, there are how many, I don't know of anybody that's a LSD addict or, a mushroom addict. You have those experiences, and they're really deep experiences. Yeah. And you don't need to keep doing the drugs. You just, okay, like I've had that experience. So anyway.
Right. I always say I've blown my doors of perception so wide open now that there's a little bit of a cold breeze of craziness coming in. I got to kind of close the doors and call it a day. Yeah. It helps. Yeah. It was very helpful for me too. I can remember sitting on my floor after taking LSD and having my dog come up to me and just stare at me in the face. And I said, this dog is a person. This dog is a person. And he wants something from me. And you can't look back from those kind of realizations, but whatever helps. I always say, take these CEOs who are just, denigrating everything cool about nature, just hit them with a bucket of liquid LSD and push them into a forest and see how they come out on the other side.
Yeah, well, that's a strategy worth considering.
But yeah, so you have a spiritual side too, where you connect a lot to Taoism. What is a Taoism, and how'd you get into that?
Well, I just remember, as a young man, kind of being interested in things and reading. I read a lot, and I came upon I first read the Tao Te Ching. I was probably 18 years old in high school, and wow, it just blew my mind. It's like, wow. First of all, it starts with accepting the mystery of it all, which was a refreshing approach to spirituality in contrast to what I had seen and witnessed in the Western churches. In other words, like the Taoism, the Tao Te Ching starts with mystery, and it doesn't try to solve it and tell you how it works. You just accept that there's a huge mystery, and that we don't know everything. And I remember thinking, okay, I trust these guys.
Are you telling me that there's not a right answer? Finally, a religion that's telling the truth.
Yeah. And then, so how do you conduct yourself? And then all this connection to, well, observe nature, observe the wild world. Water runs downhill and takes the most convenient path. And then little things like we just mentioned, like action creates opposition. So, don't think if you take an action that everyone's going to agree with you. You're going to, if you put yourself out there, you're going to create some opposition. So be careful. So these kind of thoughts really struck home to me right away, right from the beginning when I read the Taoist. And now when I go back and read Taoism now, it's the same thing. I think, yeah, they were onto it. They were onto it 5,000 years ago.
Yeah,
there's a Taoist concept of divine efficacy, Xinling. An effectiveness that's deep over a long time, not just like winning a political election or winning an argument or even winning an activist campaign, but a deeper divine sacred efficacy. And that really comes down to how one lives one's life. That's why I like your idea about accepting entropy and empathy. Because really, that's it. We're not in control of the world. We're not going to fix the world and make it the way we want it. But just common decency, treating people decently, that leads to what I interpreted this idea of the divine efficacy of the long-term, deep effectiveness of how we treat people. And whenever I'm around somebody who has that sort of common decency, treats other people really well, it makes me want to be a better person. And so I think that that's the kind of thing that is most effective over time. A lot of times you get involved in activism, you get involved in some purpose, some ideology, and you got a lot of egos banging against each other, trying to be important, trying to be significant, people want to be the spokesperson. People want to be in charge. People have an idea about the way it should go. And you get into all this mess and tangle and muddle because people have lost that more significant, more important common decency with each other. And their egos get carried away. So that's why I really appreciate the Taoists, because I think that their philosophy is not so much an ideology of what people should do, but more of a guide of how to quiet one's own ego and accept your place in this world and observe the world that you're not in control of, and you're not going to fix it. We're not going to, for example, we're not going to engineer our way out of our ecological crisis.
Right. And this is like, this whole thing also rings true about technology. We like to think that we're going to come up with this new thing and it's going to shift us away from the misery, but it's only going to really create more misery to some extent, just change the flavor of it.
Well, yeah, Chris, I mean, most of the problems we're trying to solve are problems created by earlier technologies that were created to solve earlier problems. I mean, look, we want to create electric cars to solve the global heating crisis.
Right.
Well, okay, electric cars is an attempt to solve a problem created by cars and gasoline, which was an attempt to solve the problem of too many people crowding into places and needing to travel all over the world because we broke apart communities and we destroyed communities and we destroyed ecosystems. So people couldn't live normally or as they had for hundreds of thousands of years. And now everybody had to have a job, which meant they had to go to university and go thousands of miles away from home. And so by destroying communities, we created this world where people have to move all over the place. And then we also created an economic system based on profiteering. And so when the car companies at the turn of the 20th century, the car companies could realize that they could make a lot of money, and the oil companies could make a lot of money by getting everybody in cars and traveling and building highways. So this was supposedly to solve the problem of transportation, but the problem of transportation was a problem created by the destruction of communities where people could live in a place and not have to travel all over the world to make a living or to survive. Okay, so now we've got this problem with burning all this gasoline. So now we got this global heating problem. So we're going to solve that by making electric cars. And my feeling about it is we're just solving problems that we created by our last attempt to solve problems.
Yeah.
And
I get the same feeling, and I just don't know at what point will we learn. But what is it about humans that they need to add something on to the situation rather than, take something away? Is that our fatal flaw?
Well, it is. It may well be, but I'm not even sure it's a flaw. It's just animal nature. It's mammal nature.
Yeah.
We're mammals, and evolution taught us, and all animals really over millions of years, hundreds of millions of years, to consume and reproduce and protect ourselves. And when any animal gets really good at all of that, then they run into the limits of the biophysical limits of their habitat. So wolves will overshoot a watershed. Wolves are really good hunters, and they cooperate with each other, and they're really good at hunting down game. And so wolves can move into a watershed, and they can overshoot the capacity of that watershed to produce deer or whatever they're eating, elk or whatever, caribou. They can wipe out the caribou. So then what happens to the wolves? Well, then the wolves have to decline. Okay. And so we have this predator-prey relationship, which we know occurs quite often, where you have the predator animal over consumes the prey, and then the predator animal starts to die off, and the prey recovers, and then the predator animal recovers. So you have, say, the wolves and the deer. When the deer get too wiped out, then the wolves collapse, and then the deer come back, and then the wolves come back. And that's the way these things work out in the real natural world.
Right.
But in the human, but it's not like the wolves figure this out and decide that they have to contract their numbers or their consumption. It just happens.
Right.
Here we are.
Meeting, everybody get together. We got to talk.
Yeah. We're eating too many deer, so we're going to, no. So now humans find ourselves, we've overshot the capacity of the earth to sustain our lives, our lifestyle. So we're trying to figure out every way in the world to solve this problem, except the way that it's always solved in an ecosystem, which is because we have more humans wanting more fancy lifestyles than the earth can afford, we have to contract our size, the size of our population, the size of our, and we will, by the way, this is inevitable, Chris. People don't like to hear this, but it's inevitable.
And so in your opinion, what is the form of that correction, and what is it going to come in? Obviously, there's some obvious things that are going to happen, but are we going to consciously be able to say, okay, let's slow down, or will there be, disasters? Are we going to have to eat each other?
Well, there's like something like 10 million people are starving to death every year already.
Right.
That's 2,000 an hour. That's like click, click, click. While you and I talk for an hour, 2,000 people starve to death.
Jesus.
So, the collapse is already well underway. And most of the world, there's 1 billion people living on the edge of starvation. So, yeah, the question you raise is exactly the question we face as a species. Can we consciously contract? Can we be one of the first, and perhaps the first, or a very unique thing in evolution is that a species is consciously aware that if it continues to grow, it will overshoot the capacity of its habitat.
Yeah.
And then consciously get smaller, contract our numbers, contract our consumption habits, but everything that we are, that evolution has taught us as mammals, is to grow, become bigger, have bigger families, bigger communities, do more stuff, consume more resources, live happier, more comfortable lives with more food. And I know very few people that are willing to personally choose to have less.
Right.
There are some. And there's some communities and some people who are happy to live modestly, and they can. And this is why another reason I love the Taoists is because 5,000 years ago they could see that the greed and consumption of human society was going bad already.
Wow.
And so there are a few people and few communities, some indigenous communities and some aware people who are willing to live more simple lives and live modestly.
Right here. Right.
Yeah.
Right here. I'll give it a shot. I never needed a lot.
But that's not the majority of humanity, unfortunately. So that's the big question. That's the ecological question, Chris. There it is, right there.
I wonder if is there any other examples in biology whatsoever that shows a species overshoot and contract without any real, disaster, like trees that know how to just grow just enough or something like this.
Well, yeah, because it doesn't have to be a disaster, but things reach their limit. And for example, there are cases in biology where when species are under stress, because of limits of food or limits of territory or space, they reproduce less. They become less fertile. It's almost like there's a little break in there that's a natural evolved characteristic that the species genetically knows that to keep growing is just going to add to stress. So the species kind of backs off.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I read something about this Experiment 42 behavioral sync study where the guy put a bunch of mice in a room, and after a while, when it became too overpopulated and there was too much, not enough food, and it was very obviously crowded, they stopped. The females refused to procreate with the alpha males and just hung out with what they called like the golden child, or just these kind of, non-sexual beta male mice. And
the Taoist mice.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We just want to chill, man. We don't want to.
Yeah. We're just gonna hang out with these guys we used to think were wimps, but now it turns out they're okay.
Yeah. I'd like to think I'm one of those mice, right?
Well, this is happening. This seems to be happening somewhat in the world today. The whole sort of gender fluid movement, in a way, and it's kind of like the Macho Man's day is over in a way. Like the Macho Man is not the hero anymore. And even in our movies, sure. I mean, there's still some Macho Man hero movies, but the trend is the anti-hero.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that the guy that the male is not strong or willing to defend his family or so forth. But I just feel like we can see in our own species how the culture is kind of shifting away from.
Right. Well, there's an existential threat, and what people kind of is in the air, it's subconscious, whether or not we think about it or not, is sensitivity more so than brawn and
tough guy stuff,
which I never really went out for. I like a good action movie every now and again, but come on.
Yeah.
It's pretty much useless in the modern world. So, but you also had this, the reindeer thing you talked about, where they brought them up there and let them go kind of wild. And then they got up to about 6,000.
This was St. Matthew's Island. During the war, World War II, the U.S. Army had a base on St. Matthew's Island, which is in the Bering Sea. It's sort of between. It was an army post, really, to defend against an attack from Japan from across the Pacific. But after the war, and they brought a herd of caribou to the island, essentially for food, to feed the men at the army base. And then the war ended, and they didn't need the island. They just left, and they left this herd of caribou on the island. And the herd of caribou went from, I think, something like several hundred up to 6,000 caribou. But they were living off the scrub brush and the lichen and so forth on the island. And basically they ate themselves. They overshot the island, of course. And in one winter, they dropped from 6,000 to 42 caribou. Like basically they all starved to death in one winter. So and it's a kind of a classic example. It's better even than the rat experiment, because the rat experiments were very unnatural, sort of engineered, created environments. But this was a completely natural environment, although caribou were not indigenous to that island. Sure. But in a natural environment, it's a classic overshoot event, and it's the way it works.
Yeah, Rapa Nui is a similar story, yeah?
That's right. Rapa Nui is a similar story because, and there's humans who lived on an island. They overfished the lagoon and lost some of their food sources. And plus, they were praying to these deities that they were carving in stone, and then they were hauling these stones out and sticking them up. But to get the stones from the quarry to the various places around the island, they had to roll them on these big logs. So they were cutting down their forest in order to roll the stone deities out.
Religion strikes again.
Yeah. Another great episode in the world of religion. So they lost their forests, they lost their food sources, and then they had no more big trees in order to get out past the big breakers to fish deep sea, and they fished out their lagoon, and the society collapsed. And then by that time, the Europeans showed up, and that really wiped them out. Yeah. Because the Europeans showed up with diseases and so forth and finished them off. But
that's amazing.
Anyway, that's an example. That's the example of humans overshooting a habitat. Yeah.
So, and this is a story about indigenous people who overshot, which we usually look to and say indigenous people probably know better how to live with the land, but they kind of screwed up on that one. But you also studied a lot about indigenous people. What was some tribes or places where they got it right, where you saw examples of them living within their means?
Well, we could say that the entire Western Hemisphere was in pretty good shape when the Europeans got here, but not entirely. I mean, if you look at the Inca and the Mayan civilizations in Central America, they were already overshooting their habitats, really? And they had, and they had massive slave populations, and Gaia knows, we'll never know what that may have evolved into over time without the Europeans.
Incan colonialism, maybe. Well, they would have taken over Europe.
They were already colonial. They were colonial in their own area. I mean, the Inca were taking over various communities and expanding, and so were the Mayans. And in fact, I met some of the Caranqui people in Ecuador when I was down there, and their claim to fame is that they actually never got taken over by the Inca. But the Inca were expanding until the Europeans got there, and then the expansion of the Inca and the Maya collapsed because the Europeans were even stronger and more powerful. But I don't think we could honestly say that there was no colonialism, certainly there was colonialism and slavery and expansion in indigenous communities all over the world, from Africa to Oceania, Asia, and North America, everywhere. But the European expansion in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, that was a huge impact and wiped out a lot of communities who probably were doing it very close to right. I mean, there seems to be there were a lot of communities in North and South America who were living simple, modest lifestyles. The Hopi is a good example. I mean, the Hopi even had a philosophy of simplicity and modesty, and they were happy to live on sparse land and grow their food and live simply, rather than try and get the best land by the big rivers and grow lots of food, because then there was more competition. So they were trying to live a more modest lifestyle, and they were living a more modest lifestyle. Just stay out of the rat race, so to speak, And so, the Hopi had that tradition. We talked about the Taoists. The Taoists had that tradition, and there are lots of cases. And I think in many, many communities throughout the Western Hemisphere prior to the European arrival, I think people were living modestly and had worked out certain issues with expanding to the borders where they were clashing with their neighbors, because there were certain ritualized ways of avoiding conflict and avoiding war. Neighbors. And there were groups in New Guinea, I know that Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson studied, who had certain ritualized ways of resolving conflict.
Okay.
Right. So they would sort of put on these public theatric sort of comedy performances where they would, if there was a conflict brewing among communities or within community, they would put on these sort of slapstick comedy shows, and they would mock. They would do this cross-dressing, and they would mock each other and make fun of each other, but they'd make fun of themselves kind of make it a big joke, and that this would. It was called the Navan. It was called the Navan ritual, and essentially it would quiet down these conflicts, and people could laugh at themselves. Okay, so there's an example. There's a pretty cool example.
I love this. I love this right there. Yeah. I mean, as opposed to what they do in Ireland, which my friend moved to Ireland, he says, in the middle of the night, when somebody's got a grudge with somebody else in the neighborhood, they'll do what's called calling you out. And so you'll have somebody banging drunk on the shutters at about 2 a.m. saying, Patio Flynn, get your ass out here. I'm calling you out, you bastard. And they go in and they fist fight in the yard in the middle of the night. And that's another way, Yeah.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. But no, I mean, the Margaret Mead also was really interesting with the sexuality of indigenous people, how gender fluid they were about all that stuff. And
yeah.
I always say we can learn a lot.
So, I think that the arrogance of the European colonialism really harmed humanity, because the European colonial onslaught, Holocaust, wiped out a lot of communities that were doing a lot of things right and well and had really good relationships with the ecosystems in which they lived. And instead of learning those lessons, instead of taking the opportunity to learn from those people and learn those lessons, the European colonial expansion just treated them all like idiots and useless and not even fully, in their mind, human, as if that mattered, and literally wiped them out. And so this massive genocide, rather than a massive opportunity to learn and co-learn and coexist. And so what we call common decency was just absolutely abandoned. And in its place, this colonial Holocaust that took place, some 60 to 100 million people died in the Western Hemisphere from disease and genocide.
And the thing was that the Milpa system was this great agricultural system that these people did, and I think Europeans have always just done agriculture horribly wrong, all the way up until industrialized agriculture, where we got it really wrong.
Right.
But they knew how to grow the three sisters: beans, squash, corn, whatever it is. That one fixes the nitrates in the soil, and And we just turned our nose up at them, called them savages, and executed and enslaved them like it was. And that's the great trick, right? Is saying, holding a Bible in one hand and then deeming some other people savages with the other. The European way.
Yeah.
Yeah. But look, you've written 8 books. You've even wrote the Greenpeace Chronicles, which goes all the way back to, the 70s, right? And you hung out with, Lawrence Ferlinghetti?
Yeah.
I met him. I met him and his dog at Cafe Trieste in San Francisco when I was traveling through there. Yeah.
Cool. Nice man. Eh?
Nice guy. Really nice guy.
So friendly and just willing to chat with people. And what a hero. Literary hero as well as a social hero. Loved the arts and loved people, and really a decent man.
I got to meet John Perry Barlow because my band got invited to play at his house, and I didn't know who he was when I showed up, and by the end I kind of figured out who he was, and I was like, cool. Yeah.
Cool.
But he was more into computers, right?
Right.
Yeah. But your book, look, you wrote this book, Greenpeace, The Inside Story, provides an in-depth look at the first decade of the organization. So what do you think were some of the key factors that contributed to Greenpeace's success?
Well, we already talked about the fact that we were aware of narrative, storytelling, media. It wasn't just a matter of recognizing a problem and shouting about it. You had to create a narrative that people could feel, and we created images that could reach people, as I said, viscerally. People could feel what we were concerned about and could also recognize our commitment because we were out there confronting the whalers or confronting the sealers or the nuclear bomb factories, that we were putting our bodies on the line. So this sort of, I think the key factors in the early years were that having that commitment, but making that commitment visible, that people could see that we were taking action for something that was important to us. And the other key factor was just the timing was perfect, because I think people all over the world at that time were beginning to recognize and witness and see the ecological destruction of the earth. And so when we were suddenly making noise about it and telling stories about it and doing those campaigns, it was resonating with what people were actually seeing in their lives.
Is there an aspect to nature and, what we say, Gaia and everything? Isn't it massively understudied while we're really hyper focused on going to space and stuff? We have not seen the bottom of the ocean. We don't know about the soil, how the soil works. Is this true?
Up to a point. I mean, we actually have seen a lot of the bottom of the ocean, but what we haven't done is really learned how nature works. We've learned how to manipulate natural process, but we haven't really learned and understood the complexities of evolution and of ecology. So we have not learned the real depths of ecology and biology and how nature works. And we're far too focused on our own cleverness and our own inventiveness and our ability to manipulate things and create new technologies. We've left this trail of toxins in our environment, destroyed ecosystems, biodiversity collapse, extinctions of thousands, if not millions, of species of creatures and plants that we've wiped out. And it's because we have not learned the complexity of the natural world and of evolution. And we thought that because we could manipulate and control certain things, that we could manipulate and control it all. But we cannot, even close. And this is why I say we're not going to engineer our way out of ecological collapse, because all of our engineering is eco-blind.
Right. It's
energy blind. It doesn't understand what the process of energy transformation through the ecosystem is. So even though we're very clever, very smart, we can engineer amazing, phenomenal technologies, we're naive and stupid when it comes to the complexity of ecological systems.
Yeah. It becomes totally aware, yeah. And it seems like humanity is what did Guy McPherson say? I had him on the program, and he says it's a heat engine. It's a heat engine, and it's going to boil over at some point.
Well, thermodynamically, he's right about that. It is like all living systems are heat engines. In order to grow, in order for a physical creature to grow, or a population to grow, or a civilization to grow, much less an economy and a technology, for anything to grow requires energy throughput. So this is one problem with the idea that we're going to solve our global heating issues with electric cars and windmills, where those things require more energy and minerals and mining and steel and cement, all of which is made with fossil fuels. And so we can look at, we've had, since 1979, over the last 44 years or whatever it is, over 44 years, we've had, I think, something like 38 international climate conferences. We just had a recent boom in so-called renewable energy, and our carbon emissions keep going up, and nobody seems to ask the obvious question: what's wrong? What's wrong with all our meetings and all our proclamations and all our claims that we're going to, have this great energy transformation? Because it's not happening. And the reason it's not happening is because we're ignoring the fact that we're just creating more technologies that require more energy throughput. We're energy blind, Chris.
Yeah.
As a civilization, we are energy blind. We don't really understand how energy works moving through a system. And yes, human society as a whole is a heat engine.
Yeah. So, and we were talking about degrowth as being this really controversial topic and stuff. But for guys like us, I think isn't it the only logical answer? And I get this with vegans too. They want lab-grown meat and all these kind of specialty products that have just as much carbon footprint. Well, there's lentils and beans sitting right in front of you.
Yeah, yeah. No, this is an ongoing problem. Is we keep wanting to create some invention, some technology, partially because that fits our economic theory of. A lot of these things are just stock plays, economic, business plans. But we have to contract. Humanity will contract. And it will either be because we recognize the fact and start doing the smart things, or it will just be forced upon us, and it'll be chaos and it'll be brutal.
You want to do this the hard way, or do you want to do it the easy way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're not going to grow out of overshoot, and we're not going to grow out of our ecological crisis, and we're not going to engineer ourselves out of the ecological crisis. But most people don't recognize that, and they don't want to hear it.
But we're going to Mars, Rex. We're going to Mars. We're going to trash that planet too.
Yeah, let me know when the first profitable space vehicle returns from anywhere with anything usable for anybody ever. I'm not staying up nights waiting for it.
Right. I love having you on, and you're making me feel better. Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to ask you about this because you also don't just focus on the environment. You've done other stuff. You co-authored a U.S. patent for music tuning software and founded Just Tonic Tuning Inc. What is this?
Yeah. Well, it's, I mean, I have lots of interests.
And okay.
Music is one of them. I love music, and you know, I'm certainly not anything like a professional musician. I can see your banjo, and it looks like, what is that, a viola or something on the wall back?
Cheap little violin, yeah.
Violin. I love music. I love playing music. I'm nothing like a professional musician, although I have a son who is a professional musician, and all of my sons play music, and you know, I love music.
What kind of music turns your crank? I got to ask you.
Oh, I grew up playing, you know, rock music and folk music and anything guitar-based music and pianos, and I really love reggae. I love African music. I love African drumming. I have some. I met Baba Olatunji and some of the African drummers, and oh my God, I love that music. I love anything with a groove, man.
Yeah. You see, probably like Fela Kuti fan.
I like the progressive rock groups, like, you know. Well, I mean,
yes.
Going back, yes, we're good. Yeah, I like music. I like good music. I like to hear, you know, I put on this festival every year on Cortez with a group of friends. We put on a music festival here. You know, it's all acoustic music and singers and songwriters and bands and fiddle players. And, you know, I think of it as, you know, real musicians playing real instruments, making music.
Yeah.
And, but the whole musical tuning thing came about because a friend of mine and I both were aware of the tuning problem. This might be too much to explain, but for your, you know, in one session with your audience, but all musical instruments in the Western tradition and the piano tradition and the fretted instruments, they're all out of tune. So if you've ever heard a good Bach choir sing a cappella music, and you go, wow, that's really beautiful. Why is that so beautiful? Well, it's so beautiful because it's in perfect harmonic tune. And if you hear like a string quartet play when they're not playing fretted instruments, you hear these beautiful harmonies, and you go, wow, that's beautiful. Why is that so beautiful? Well, it's beautiful because it's beautifully conceived music, but it's also beautiful because it's in perfect harmonic tuning. And the reason for this is because what the note that we call a D note, for example, is not the same in the key of A as it is in the key of E or the key of D. So all the notes, when you're singing a cappella or when you're playing in a string quartet, all the musicians are just by ear naturally slightly retuning each note depending on what key and what kind of chords they're playing in order to be in perfect harmony. This was a problem, by the way, that confused the Greek musicians and Pythagoras, and they couldn't believe that there wasn't a system for making all notes always work in all keys, and it was a huge problem. But it's only a problem when you have fixed tone instruments.
Right.
If you're playing a fiddle or if you're violin in a string quartet, when you play a D note, you rock that D note until it fits the chord that's being played. It's not the same. It's not the same tuning in every key, in every chord.
Mm.
And you, as a musician, don't even have to know that. You just hear it. You just play the right note. Even an amateur singer, when you're singing together around the campfire, you'll sing the harmonic harmony. You won't sing the piano note. But once you fix all the notes, you say, okay, here's the E, here's the A, here's the D note, here's the D sharp. Once you fix all those notes, then you're hooped, because you can't change those notes while you're playing. So they had to come up with the tempered scale, which is how the piano is tuned. And it's how guitars and all fretted instruments are tuned. As we say, it's close enough for rock and roll.
like Chuck Berry, just add a tune and just do that duck walk and you'll be all right.
Yeah. Just get the groove happening. It doesn't matter.
Right.
So, but with the advent of computers, a friend of mine and I thought, well, shit, we could take a fretted instrument, a fixed tone instrument like a piano and a guitar. We could run it through a software system that would do the work that the musician's doing in a string quartet, where they're changing the pitch of the D note or the E note to fit the chord and the key they're in. We could just do that electronically and then attach it to the guitar and the piano, and do it for you. And so we could have pure harmonic music in with fixed tone instruments, with pianos and fretted instruments. So we created the software to do this.
Wow.
Here's the sad part. We had a lot of people who loved what we did. A lot of people who worked in experimental music, or who were composers, or were aware of the issues and who loved harmonic music. But the music industry as a whole just kind of shrugged it off, like, who gives a shit? As I say, it's close enough for rock and roll, the piano guitar music that we play today. It's fine. It's good. It's great. I play the guitar. I play the piano. It works for me. I can, we can sing along, and we don't really notice that the notes aren't perfectly in pure harmonics. So it didn't really turn out to have a huge sort of economic future in the music industry. It may still.
The music industry is an evil behemoth. They don't know even what's good music anymore.
No, well, I'm not sure they ever did, and they certainly don't care about. I'm sure they don't care about pure harmonic music.
Probably not.
And even I've got friends in the music industry. I have friends who are successful musicians in the folk and rock world, and they said, "Yeah, it's interesting, but." They kind of shrug their shoulders too. It's sort of like, yeah. Seems like a lot of trouble to go to. I mean, we're doing just fine the way it is. So anyway, we didn't get it. We were in conversations with major manufacturers, Steinway, Yamaha, all the synthesizer makers and so forth, and we were explaining this technology to them. But it was sort of like they thought, wow, this is really cool. It's really exciting. Steinway was interested in building a piano that could do this.
Mm.
But then they turned it over to their marketing people, who went out and said, there's no market for it. The public doesn't care. So if it adds, if it adds an extra $50 to the cost of a synthesizer, then it's going to add $100 to the retail price. And if it adds $100 to the retail price, it's not worth it.
Right.
The public's not going to pay. They're going to buy the cheaper synthesizer. So it's still a really good idea, and it could still happen. And I kind of guess someday it will happen in the music industry.
I think so, But it goes over their heads, the idea. Probably a lot of people, they just want to be the musician they saw on TV, or so, a lot of people start music with the wrong intentions. But yeah, like a piano that had that option, I'm into it.
Yeah,
I'll take one.
we had a lot of musicians who were really into it and really thought this was the coolest thing. And I had music professors and choral teachers, choir teachers who, try to teach their students to sing in harmonic key, rather harmonic intonation, real pure harmony, rather than the piano notes. So they would love to have a piano that when you're in the key of D and you're playing an E chord in the key of D, or an E minor chord in the key of D, that it's pure harmonics.
Yeah.
Because you can't do that on a piano. In other words, the choral teacher can't play the piano note for the choir because it's the wrong notes.
Now, can a synthesizer can do it though, right?
It could, but it would have to be able to retune every note. But a synthesizer is built just like a classic piano. All the notes are fixed.
Oh, right.
Now you can adjust them. It's like you can put a wah-wah pedal on every note.
Yeah.
But then someone has to actually do the adjusting.
Yeah.
And our idea was we could build a piano where you could play it, and the software does the adjusting.
That's wild. That's so wild. Yeah, I hope it catches on. I'm constantly playing out of tune because my instruments are cheap, but I do vibrato just to cover it all up, so nobody knows.
Sure, and that works. And really, if you got a groove going and you're playing music, close enough is good enough. And to me, and it's not like I feel like music suffers greatly because it's not all pure harmonic. No, I don't believe that. And the music that I play a guitar.
Yeah.
And I'm just fine. And it's all close enough.
It should be the flavor you can get, an extra flavor. If you want something, different, you can enjoy this kind of music. Or if you want a fiddle played out of tune, or, like these old honky-tonk pianos that are constantly out of tune. It's got a feeling. It's got its own thing going on. Everybody's welcome,
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so I want to ask you one last question, then I'm going to let you get back to your wonderful life over there and your wonderful Australian Shepherd dog. Are you, in fact, a vegan or vegetarian?
No.
Busted.
But yes. No, but yes, but sometimes, and I'm not sure it's the right question, but it is a question. It's a valid question.
I just threw you under the bus, Rex.
You threw me under the bus, but I've been through phases of that. I've been a vegetarian. I've been a vegan. But here's the thing. I feel like ideologies can get us in trouble. Like things that we say we have to do, and we have to always do it this way, and no compromise. So what do I do if I go back to, my family dinner or something, and they're serving chicken,
right?
Am I going to say, oh no, do you have anything vegan? No, I'm not going to say that. I'm going to just be respectful, and I'm going to eat the dinner I'm served. And my wife and I do eat some fish, and sometimes eat, we eat chicken or eat other things. We try to eat local food. We do eat local food. We live in a rural place, and we eat local food. Shellfish, fish, chickens, local chickens, and so forth.
I miss that delicious seafood. I really do.
But we, we eat a very, sort of vegetarian heavy diet, lots of salads, soups that we make, and so forth. We have our garden, we grow some food. And I'm just not an ideologue that goes all the way with things, primarily because, sometimes it's, to me, there are other values, such as just going along with the world as it is.
Right.
And not trying to make the world fit, my ideology about eating. So the answer is no, I'm not an absolute vegan or vegetarian, but I do eat a vegetarian heavy diet.
Well, we'll give you a pass because you've done so much for the world.
Well, you don't have to give me a pass. It is what it is, and I feel like I feel fine with, we try to live a very modest lifestyle. I know we talked earlier about, the fact that there were 10 million people a year starved to death.
Right.
So why aren't we all just sharing all of our food with it? Why aren't we all going to those places where people are hungry and taking all our food with us and giving it to them? Well, that may not be practical either.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
and I will say, the vegan community, the dogma involved with it sometimes can be completely overwhelming and stuff. But most of us, I'm reasonable. I say everybody do what you can when you can. Obviously, every attempt is good.
I think that's the key, Chris. Is it's definitely better for the ecosystems if we eat less meat, and especially meat that's industrialized meat, but industrialized food in general, and grow more of our own food and eat locally, eat local food that's not shipped for, with fossil fuels and trucks, and so forth and so on. So, but if people just are reasonable, I'm going to take issue with people because they eat a little meat every once in a while or this or that. If people are modest and eating modest diets, to me, that's helpful.
Yeah.
But definitely people who are vegan and people who are vegetarian and people who do avoid meat, hats off to them. That's better. It's certainly better for the environment. There's no question about that. It's less demand on the soils of the planet.
Sure. But I tell you, I have to spend at least 3 extra hours in the kitchen every day just to get the right thing. Today I had pizza, and you have to really kind of be creative. Yeah. You got to get creative. So last question, what's in your garden? What's growing this year? Can we expect?
We have kale. We have kale and broccoli and peas and beans and tomatoes, and we have all of our salad greens, and we have onions, and it's kind of the basics. We have potatoes, squash, so we have all of those kind of things, all the basics, and we grow and eat as much of it we can. We're in a potato co-op with some of our neighbors.
Cool.
So we all get together and plant potatoes and harvest the potatoes and heal up the potatoes and that's fun because we also get together and we just get to hang out and eat together and so forth. And
I like the idea of going regional. Some people go vegan, but they still eat processed food. But if you're going regional, you're really doing just as good, I think.
Well, yeah, you are. I mean, I think regional is one of the most important things. Localize everything. The more local you're eating, then there's less fossil fuels hauling cans of stuff and trucks and trucks hauling food from all over the world and then processing it and so forth. So there's a lot of ways to kiss the earth, so to speak. I think that comes from a Rumi poem or something. There's a lot of ways to kneel and kiss the earth. There's a lot of ways to contribute and do less harm with our lives. But I encourage vegetarianism and veganism because it's better. Yeah. But I also encourage just modest eating and modest consumption. I mean, the clothes we wear, where does this cotton come from? Right. We trace all, how many rivers were drained of water in order to grow the cotton in our clothes and so forth. So, consuming less, living modestly is the best answer because it just means less resources have gone into making life possible for us.
If your socks are full of holes, you're doing it right.
That's right. If your fingernails are a little dirty, that's good.
All right. Well, let's talk right after this, but we'll sign off to all the people in TV land. Look, it's Rex Weyler. He's a co-founder of Greenpeace, ecologist, journalist, author, activist, hell of a guy, decent human being. That's it. Anything you want to say before we go?
No, that's good. Blessings to you, Chris. I'm just thrilled to get a chance to speak with you.
All right. We'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.